Welcome to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, the podcast where we take questions I've been asked in the past from so many different roles, along with questions you'll ask and we'll ask together to, learn. Along the way, we'll build our capacity to become a community of problem solvers. I'm your host, Janice Case. Let's get to it, shall we? Welcome to episode 8, folks. I am thrilled to announce that this week we are finally shifting to a newer model for our intro and wrap up of the podcast each week. My friend Melissa Ellis, who you all know from episodes 3 and 5, has graciously agreed to be my second as we move forward. If you've heard those episodes, you already know that the two of us have clicked, and I have been so humbled to see behind her screen on her own life. Likewise, I know your listening experience will only be enhanced when you have multiple views shared. So with that, welcome, Melissa.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here.
Janice, I'm really happy to be here, and I want to thank you for even allowing me the opportunity. You do such an amazing job of this on your own that it's not as if you need a second. I'm just going to put that out there. You do not need a second. I'm honored that you would like me to be. I have a blast every time we're together, and more importantly, I learn every single time I listen or I participate. So again, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, you're so sweet. It's like I scripted that, folks. Don't you think? It's like I scripted it. I did a really beautiful job. And right back at you, right? I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a love fest, which is part of why I love this, because I say the exact same things about you every time we talk. And so I think that's why this is going to be a beautiful combination. So I want to get right to the episode. So somebody asked me once what I knew about seasonal affective disorder, and at that time I wasn't really particularly familiar with the condition. Though as I was having this conversation, I did kind of have a little bit of an epiphany, because as this person was describing her experience, I could think of a couple of folks in my life who I thought, oh my gosh, this could explain so much. So since then, I've paid a lot of attention, and I've really done a little digging on my own, and I was, as I looked at some statistics, I was amazed to learn that, seasonal affective disorder, otherwise known as SAD, affects over 10 million Americans alone, with another 10 to 20% of people likely feeling symptoms, but they've never been diagnosed, if you will. Likewise, another interesting stat that of them, I think I read women are 4 times more likely than men to experience SAD, which I thought was interesting. So those stats alone made it a viable topic for our podcast to cover as we return to the realm of personal well-being and health. Melissa, talk to me. Have you heard of SAD? Any experience with folks in your life?
Like you, I went into this not knowing very much about it at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've heard about it, but I heard, I think winter blues is kind of how, or people who are just affected because, they get depressed in the winter. But I didn't have nearly the knowledge that I have now.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's fair. So this really came into focus for me then as I reestablished a close friendship with a college friend. So we, like in a lot of cases, we had drifted apart. And Gentry, who is that college friend, has come back into my life, and she is somebody who is impacted by SAD. And for the first time over the course of this last winter, I saw firsthand her navigate it, and it got real. Like, it was really just fascinating for me to watch how much of a change I saw in her personality, and how she kind of navigated just the regular day-to-day life stuff. So in the episode itself, we're going to cover symptoms, we're going to cover impact on her life, how she's navigated the challenge, and what someone with SAD and those who know someone who suffers from SAD can do to mitigate the symptoms, right, that seem to set in from the fall through the winter, right? Does that sound good to you?
That's a very important piece of it, and I'm glad you'll be discussing that, is how those of us who love someone, or, who just may know someone, how we can support them. I think that's important.
Yeah, agreed. So, folks, if you're listening and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I've never heard of it, I don't know if this episode really pertains to me, listen, because I'm going to wager a guess as soon as we get into this, you're going to think to yourself, oh, wait a second, that actually seems more familiar than I thought. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Jen Gentry. Let's get to it. All right, Jen, thank you so much for agreeing to spend some time talking with us about this. I think what's really important about this topic is that, it is highly personal. And yet, I think that for our listeners to hear from somebody who's, kind of just a regular person like we all are, right? Kind of walking through, if you will, the year and thinking in terms of the impact of seasonal affective disorder. So we're going to get to what it is and all that fun stuff. But first, I'd love if you just kind of introduce yourself. What's your general life like, your family, professional, that kind of stuff, so people get a sense of your kind of typical day to day as we begin to talk about this challenging topic.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is something that I have a bit of passion about and have struggled with. So it's nice to be able to share that. I know there's lots of people out there who have probably experienced the same things. But so I'm Gentry. I am married. I have two teenage boys. And I work in the swim industry for a local swim school. And I also do faster weight coaching like you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And my both my boys are, I have one in college and one in high school. So my college son is, pretty independent, but my high school son is a competitive swimmer. So we spend a lot of time running around and, getting him to and from swimming and meets, and it's a pretty busy schedule. It's like a part-time job for him. So, we're running a lot. So, just like the average person, juggling a couple balls and, can.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think that's important, that last piece you pointed out, because, we all kind of go through life with our different struggles and our different challenges. And yet what I think kind of brings us together is how similar we are as far as day to day and the things that we're trying to actually accomplish day to day for our families and for our jobs, et cetera, while we're dealing with these different struggles. So you and I, obviously, we've known each other since college. And so, and we, we're in each other's weddings. And then, like a lot of people, we kind of, went our own ways, if you will, for probably like 20 years, almost, I feel like, not quite 20 years. And yeah, the faster way stuff brought us back together, which has been such a gift. And it's been so interesting for me to get to know you again. And as our bonds kind of deepened around coaching and that work, really getting a sense of how you have really navigated your life while handling the challenge of seasonal affective disorder. And we've even talked about kind of flashing back as far as college and the struggles at that point. And I can remember some things, and of course didn't know them in that light. But before we go down all those paths, why don't we back up and start with, from your perspective, because you are somebody who, like I said, lives with this every day. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what it is? What is seasonal affective disorder? When is the window of time it usually impacts you? Kind of give us a general picture, if you would.
Sure. So, I first want to clarify that many people probably experience winter blues or something that they call,
Sure.
Referred to as cabin fever.
Yeah.
But not everyone experiences SAD, or what we call seasonal affective disorder. So for me, it happens in the winter. There is a summer version of it as well.
Okay.
It's much less common and the symptoms are different. But for my personal experience, I experienced the winter version.
Okay.
And it's basically a subtype of clinical depression.
Okay.
And it happens as the winter months come. It gets, darker. The time changes. It's more, dark and gray. The sun, for me, is a very big part of it.
Okay.
And again, I'm talking about my personal experience, but I think that plays into it. It has to do with the light changing.
Sure.
And it's like I slow down. I lose my motivation. I lose my drive. I become less social. I want to sleep a lot. It's not debilitating, but it definitely makes an impact on my daily routine and my daily life. And sometimes it's harder than others. And this year has been challenging in a couple different ways, and I know we plan to talk about that. But some of the even statistics about it is that it's estimated that 10 million Americans suffer from SAD, and a lot of people may not know that they do. most people, the age of onset tends to be between 18 and 30. And some people can experience, severe enough symptoms that they like require hospitalization. That's never happened to me. It's just, for me, it's just a impact on my daily routine and my daily life, and my daily activities. So, it definitely is a piece of mental health, but
Sure.
I think there's probably a lot of people out there who feel like, oh, I've got the winter blues, but they may have something even more than what they think they do.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of self-diagnosed, but what they basically say is that, you have to have these symptoms 2 years in a row at the same time, same time of year. And I've had it for years. Like,
Right.
I don't need anyone to tell me that that's what it is, because honestly, I am a completely different person in the summer than I am in the winter. And it's something that's so apparent to me. I know that that's what it is.
Okay. So that is, thank you for that kind of broad view, and then also drilling down to some of the nuances. I want to dig a little bit into that last part where you said you're a completely different person, and you gave us some general characteristics, if you will, or symptoms, if you will, of SAD and kind of what it looks like for most people in general. So walk us through, and I'm thinking about two things. I'm thinking about when it first starts to come on, because like you said, you've been experiencing it for years, so you probably have a sense in the fall, right, of like, oh god, it's coming, right? So walk us through that, and then walk us through, and not to be a downer, but through the hardest, like give us an example of like the hardest day, right? Like, what does it look like? What are you feeling? What are you thinking? I think it would be really helpful for people to understand that.
Sure. So for me, as the fall comes, here in Virginia, our weather stays pretty warm through, September, even part of October.
Sure.
And like this past year, as November came and the time changed, like I can start to feel it. And for me, it is a very big tie. And I know this is going to sound so corny, but it is a very big tie to the sun and how it feels.
Okay.
I know I don't know how else to explain it, because that's what I feel. I could feel it as the seasons started to change. The sun changes. It's not the warm, like bright sun from the summertime. It's, it takes on a different feel. And I know that sounds so corny, and someone's going to be like, what the heck is she talking about? How to describe it. I can feel it by this way the sun is changing. And I tend to start to feel, I start to feel it like maybe end of November, but I can typically push through like November and December, because we're so busy with the holidays.
Sure.
We have things that we're going, you have traditions that you do with your family. You're getting the Christmas tree. You're getting prepared for Christmas. I can usually push through that stuff. I'm with family, and that tends to, it's traditional stuff, and I look forward to
Sure.
it. So I think it's stuff I can usually push through. By the time I get to January, kind of have the letdown of all the holiday stuff. By the time I get to January, I can usually feel it pretty full on, like kicking in. And I think, like I said before, it's something similar that a lot of people feel, like that down feeling, that winter blues, that like, it gets colder, it gets darker, you're kind of just chugging along. And for me, it becomes a very much a feeling of just kind of just barely getting through,
Yeah.
And for me, what that looks like is I get super, super tired. That's a big piece for me.
Okay.
It's like I feel like I can't get enough sleep.
Okay.
I am a bit of a night owl, but I feel like in the winter, I need like 9 or 10 hours of sleep. It's like, and I think it's just my body's way that it reacts to, it's kind of like hibernating, like bears.
Oh, sure.
Hibernate in the winter, and that's like their bodies slow down, and that's what it feels like. I feel very sluggish and very tired, and like it's an effort sometimes to do things. I totally pull away from my social, like I feel myself kind of folding into myself, and everything takes a little bit more effort. And I did better this year with, having done Faster Way for almost a year. By the time January came, I went in thinking, okay, it's going to be better. I've been exercising. I've been eating whole foods. I've been
Right.
taking care of myself. I feel much healthier than I have in a long time. And I went into this year thinking, okay, this is going to be better. I'm going to be better.
Right.
And for me, that didn't end up being the case.
Yeah.
I feel like looking back, I set my expectations way too high of what to expect this year. I knew it was going to come. I knew I wasn't going to be able to avoid it, but I think I expected it to be much, much better and have a much different outcome than I did. And so then, because it wasn't, and I was still struggling, and I think I set my expectations too high, I struggled with trying to deal with the disappointment of that, I guess.
Yeah.
So that added an extra layer this year.
No, that
So,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, but to go back, like, I feel like for me, this started, and it's funny because I've been thinking about this a lot, knowing that we were going to do this podcast. And so I've really been thinking about it a lot. And I think because, again, like I said, I went in feeling healthier this year. I was very aware, and I've just been thinking a lot about, like, when did I start feeling this, and when, how long do I really think I have had this? And I started to think back to, like, college. Like, I don't remember ever feeling this way, like in high school, in college, my second year of college. I think it kind of kicked in a little bit that first semester, going into the winter. I can remember kind of being in this not great place. I was living in a dorm that was very dark and concrete walls, and I don't think that helped any. So I also was going through some, some relationship stuff with a very good friend, and that kind of, didn't help either. But so I ended up moving home because I was not happy.
I remember that. Yeah.
I do remember, and I kind of was at that place where I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with, like, the whole party scene, at school, and, like, let's just get this college stuff done. But I could not focus. I was not in a good place. I was very low, and so I was crying a lot. Like, it was very bizarre. So that's probably when I can think back to maybe it being the first year that maybe something like that happened. So my sophomore year in college.
Right.
I don't really remember, the rest of college. I was at home. Like, I wasn't in that dark, dank, dorm where I wasn't happy. I don't remember it really being that way, the next couple of years after that.
Okay.
But, I did start thinking about the fact that the other times that I can remember really having a hard time was after my boys were born. And with my first son, I, he was born in June, and I took like 3 months off, and then I went back to work, I think in October, and it was hard for me, and I loved being pregnant. I loved when my kids were born, I was like on this high, but when I went back to work, I had a really tough time.
Right.
I went back part-time, and I worked for like 6 more months, maybe 4 or 5, maybe it was like 5 months. And I struggled a lot. I was very emotional, and then, so I always said, like, I had delayed postpartum depression with my boys, because I didn't realize it with my first one. But then I had my second one, and it happened again. And so I was like on this high for like 3 or 4 months, 5 months after the boys were born. And then, like, I crashed. So I always told people, like, oh, I had delayed postpartum depression. Have you ever heard of that? No. But that was like the only way I had to describe it.
Right.
In thinking about this whole process and thinking about, been thinking about the seasonal affective disorder, kind of analyzing it more than I probably would, because I knew, we've been talking about it a lot. I realized that both of my kids were born in the summer. So 6 months out was right when I would have normally been experiencing probably my seasonal affective disorder. So I like had this huge epiphany, like, oh my God, there is not such a thing as delayed
postpartum.
It was actually my seasonal affective disorder. And so that's when I really feel like I can really remember a time. And I think since then, it's been pretty consistent. Every winter I feel that I get tired. I just want to sleep.
Right.
So that was like a big kind of revelation for me in kind of thinking through what we wanted to talk about. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's why because they were both born in the summer. So
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense.
It really does. So what you've done is, it sounds like, is through all of your kind of own reflection, dug down to a not root cause necessarily, because we're not necessarily talking about cause of, but more of just being able to identify the timeline. And I wonder if it's not typical, right? It probably is typical that when people start to experience something like this, right? And we always give the disclaimer that neither one of us are medical professionals, neither one of us are psychologists, right? This is just us talking about your experience, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's not unusual for it to be inconsistent, right? And here's the crazy analogy I'm going to make. I'm thinking about menstrual cycles, right? Like when you think back, way back when you start that, like it's not consistent, right? It's like it takes a period of time for your body to adjust and say now it's regular. And there are going to be men out there who are like mortified by this analogy, but I wonder if it's not similar, right? That onset, like you kind of, something prompted it, like you said, sophomore year. You were already kind of set up to be experiencing some forms of kind of depression and that type of thing. And then, but when circumstances were fine, your body was still fine. And then, like you said, and certainly we hear lots and lots of information around pregnancy and childbirth and all the potential things it can spark, if you will. And so, yeah, it's a really, I think your epiphany is probably dead on. And yes, okay, so the few years in between college and your first baby, maybe it was inconsistent, but it doesn't mean it wasn't there. It's just that maybe it wasn't as severe, or just it was kind of hibernating itself, right?
Or you chalk it up to something else. Like you're like,
yes,
oh,
of course.
This,
Yeah. Well, I think that happens a lot with us, right? When we're experiencing negative, whether it's literally physical symptoms of an illness, whether it's more emotional like this, we can always find an excuse for it. So let's back up a little bit, because I do want to dig a little bit. You talked about the window it impacts you. And you talked about, in general, kind of what it feels like. And I really appreciate the analogy to a bear hibernating, right? The idea that, like, you just become really sluggish and you just kind of want to stay in your home and and you can't get enough sleep and all those things. Talk a little bit about then kind of how you see, you did talk about, like, you withdraw from friend, and again, also such an important point, because I think we all do that, right? When we're hurting, and I'm using quote fingers, in whatever way, the first thing we tend to do is turn inward instead of outward, right? For the people and with the people we need most. But talk about impact on a little bit more on that social piece, and especially your family. Like, I'm thinking in terms of your husband and your boys, and what do they notice? How do they experience it? Since it is something that you kind of navigate every year.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this year my boys are older and they're more expressive, and like I've had these moments where I'm like, I think what comes with, and I'm kind of going a little bit sideways here, but it's related. I think part of the whole seasonal affective disorder for me, in my experience, is the guilt and the shame that comes with it.
Yeah.
I know what it is, but I feel so guilty and when I can't get stuff done, or where I'm sleeping instead of like doing the things that I need to be doing, like cleaning the house or doing the laundry or doing the dishes, and that stuff falls behind.
Yeah.
And yes, those are things that my kids notice, and my husband picks up the slack and helps with that stuff. But like even something as dumb as like trying to figure out what's for dinner, which we all hate anyways. It's like it's part of being an adult.
Right.
Let's for dinner for the rest of our lives. It just can be overwhelming. Like and then I just kind of shut down, and then I go, I can fall back into that. Like I'm just tired. Everything takes so much effort. And you feel shame about that because you're like, this isn't that hard. I do this normal the rest of the year, but like it's something so chemical, I think, and I fight it and I fight it and I fight it, and that takes the energy out of you too,
Absolutely.
So So I think, like a typical day for me, and like I told you, I have a competitive swimmer, so there's a couple mornings a week where he has to be at practice very early and he doesn't drive yet. So I'm
Sure.
getting up at 4 a.m. And for someone who, is a late person anyways, which I've tried to work with and tried to get to bed earlier, but I just, again, fighting that is hard. So, I'm up typically until 11 or 12. So sometimes on those mornings, I'm getting 4 hours of
Oh
sleep.
my gosh, yeah.
Doesn't work. I don't think it works for a normal person, but I'm not young anymore and I can't push through it. And so
Right.
then, he goes to practice and then he goes to school. And then I find myself going back to bed for a couple hours and then half the day's gone. And then I feel guilty about that because I'm
Yeah.
not getting through like, so there's this big, bubble around it. And I feel like I'm fighting it. And then I end up getting anxiety about sleeping because I'm not getting enough sleep. And then
Sure.
I'm anxiety. And then I'm dreaming about having anxiety about sleep. Like it becomes this big snowball.
Wow.
And I think fighting it, and I think that's kind of what I've come to a conclusion this year is that I was fighting it too hard because I expected it to be different. And I was just fighting it, fighting it, fighting it. And that was, taking a lot of energy from me as well. But
Sure.
yes, I think, I mean, a typical day, I feel like, and I feel guilty saying this, but it's like sleeping, 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 do one thing.
Right.
And I get so frustrated, Janice, because I would, like on the weekends, I might sleep in late. And then I would get up and I would go run an errand or go grocery shopping or do something. And then I would come home and I would be exhausted. And I'm like, I did one thing. Why am I so
Right.
exhausted?
Right.
Like, I don't, like, it's hard. It's hard. And I feel kind of embarrassed,
Yeah.
like, but I have to remember that I do believe there's a chemical component of it. And it's, expending all that energy fighting it and feeling bad about it and feeling shameful and guilty, we know from Faster Way that doesn't help us.
Exactly.
We know that mindset is not, we have to do the best we can every day. And, we have to, if I can do one thing more today than I did yesterday, then that's some progress, and
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead.
spent a lot of time reflecting this year, and that has helped me. Although I did it late in the season, I'm really starting to come out of it now. Interestingly, the time just changed.
Of course.
And not just that messes us all up, but we've had some, couple warm days here, and I can feel it. I go and I sit out on the deck, and I just soak that sun up. I can't explain it.
Yeah. Well, I think that, and you talked about the sun earlier, Jen, and again, I don't think I know you said, gosh, it's going to sound so weird, but I think most of us can tell the difference, right? We're not going to, I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to get into scientific explanations. And if there's somebody listening who wants to comment and give us the scientific explanation, go for it. But there's no question that the power, if you will, coming from the sun is different in the winter months, right? So I think all of us can feel that. I can sit outside on a 60-degree day in the winter versus a 60-degree day in the spring, and it feels quite different, right? Like
Yes.
it literally physically feels different on my skin. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me. So I think so. It's wonderful to hear. I mean, I guess the one of the good things is that unlike other forms of depression or other forms of conditions like this, if you will, that at least there's a window, right? Like, in all likelihood, there's an end, right? It's coming around the same time, like you said, every year, etc. So, and it's so important, Jen, that you are being so open about kind of how it makes you feel and the actual reality of what it feels like. Because I feel like for folks who are listening to us, again, some people maybe experience this and know it already. Some people may be experiencing and not realizing that it's something like kind of very specific that's happening to them. And I encourage folks to go do some research, right? We're not doctors, and we're not going to formally say what it is and formally say anything, quite frankly. And so I would encourage you to go do some research on your own if it's something that, if you're listening to Jen and you're kind of going, oh my gosh, wait a second, that sounds a little bit too familiar. So I'm going to wager a guess, and I'm going to come back to talking about kind of how I've seen it from a distance with you this year, but I'm going to wager a guess, given the amount of time you've struggled with this, that you've quote unquote tried some things, right? There are things that you try in order to mitigate the impact on you. And you've already been very open, like living your fast way lifestyle. you really believe the whole food nutrition and the intermittent fasting and the exercise, etc., was going to change it. And then you kind of had to face a realization that, this is chemical. So even doing all those things certainly is good, and I need to do it. My body needs it more than ever, but it's not going to eliminate it, or I'm not suddenly going to experience this. But what are some of the things you've tried over the years? And folks, again, I'm going to begin this part by saying, listen, and Jen said this to me on the phone when we were chatting about this podcast, that her experience won't be your experience, right? So if she tried something you haven't tried and it didn't work, don't feel like you shouldn't try it, right? If there are things she hasn't tried that you've tried that work, that's great, but because everybody has their own experience with it. But I'd love to hear some things that you've tried that you thought would work that didn't work, and is there anything that you feel like has been helpful, or at least kind of helps with some of the shame and the guilt that you talk about feeling?
Sure. So the things that I've always tried to do, well, firstly, I will say I am on a very low dose, like anti-anxiety, antidepressant that I take all the time.
Okay.
And so it's important, and sometimes I'm not so good about being consistent about that. So it's important that I stay consistent with that.
Sure.
And the other thing that I've done in the past is take a vitamin D supplement.
Okay.
And I'm not always super consistent about that. This year I was super consistent about it. And so that was another reason I got a little frustrated, I think. And not to say that this year was worse than any other year. I think it was more my expectation that it was going to be different that I struggled with.
Yep.
There is no doubt that eating the whole foods and exercising and intermittent fasting have helped me stay consistent. I have been way more consistent in what I've eaten and like you said, we know that is good for our bodies, whether it changed this or not. I know that my body feels healthier and is healthier despite this piece of the puzzle of feeling this way this time of year. And with the vitamin D, it's important to, and again, I'm not a doctor, but from everything I've read, it's important to not just take a straight vitamin D3 supplement. You need to take it with vitamin K and vitamin A because that helps your body absorb it. I guess it's more effective that way.
Okay.
So I was very, and so I started that in the fall, being really consistent because I don't need it as much in the summer because the sun's out and I can get my own vitamin D.
Sure.
So, and you talked about how, and I just want to just say this really quick as an aside, it's like as the seasons change, it's like the seasonal affective disorder like goes into remission kind of, you feel it going. I can feel it now. I mean, this is a good time to be talking about this because people are going to start feeling themselves coming out of that kind of, sluggish feeling, and that it's like a flower. It's like you're blooming, just like a flower. I mean, it is very much biological, I think.
Right.
And why should we not, lots of animals, in nature, that's their mode of survival during the winter. Birds migrate.
Yeah, very true.
Nest and bears prepare for hunting. Why is it any surprise that some of us experience those same physiological changes in response to the seasons? Like it seems surprising to us, but really it shouldn't be, So definitely the vitamin D is helpful. I've done a little bit of light therapy where you have like a light and you use that. You're supposed to use that in the morning when you wake up, and it's supposed to help like reset your your melatonin, and your serotonin is a big part of this as well. Like your melatonin is like your sleep hormone, and your serotonin is like, I think, your waking hormone. Like, I might not get this completely, but I know those two things are involved in this. And so the light helps your body know that it's time to be awake. And so you should do it first thing in the morning. Well, my issue, and I've done some of it this year, a little bit more than I ever have, but not as consistently as I probably have. But my issue was like, you're supposed to do it in the morning. Well, I'm always sleeping in the morning.
Right.
And by the time, I remember to do it, it's, maybe 12 or 1 o'clock, and you shouldn't do it then because then you're messing up. You're not helping yourself any because then you're making your body seem like, oh, it's morning now at 1 o'clock. And then, so some of it is that cycle of like sleep, wake, sleep, wake, sleep, wake.
Right.
So that's something you can do. They say exercising is helpful because that helps, boost those endorphins in your body and obviously helps you stay healthy as well. Trying to think of what other things I've done.
Well, those are all lots of great suggestions. And it's interesting because there are things that I've heard of over the years for different purposes, right? Like when we lived in Washington for a few years, one of the things that our doctors immediately said was vitamin D, right? Like you need to just start taking vitamin D. It needs to be something a part of because you just got less sun. So it's interesting to hear that. And I have some other friends who use light therapy for different reasons. Not because they experience seasonal affective disorder, but because they have other symptoms that are kind of similar, and for the same reasons that you described, like the impact that it has on their brain, etc. And it's making me think about, there's a really powerful book by Daniel Pink, I think it's Daniel Pink, yeah, called When, and I read it about a year ago. Now I think I want to go back to it. But a big part of it, the basis of it really is about our biological clocks and the impact of our biological clocks on how we kind of live every single day, right? And so he gets into, like, you've called yourself a night owl, and you've talked about your sleep patterns and stuff. He gets into all of that, and then he expands it, of course, like only he can, to kind of all realms of life. So that would be a really great follow-up for people, not necessarily specifically around seasonal affective disorder, but just in general about better understanding how our biological clocks work. And if you tend to be somebody who is more active at night, what you can do to balance that, right? Myself, I'm a morning person, and he talks there about, making sure that you do the activity that most require analysis first thing in the morning, right? Because that's when your brain is the most engaged or what have you. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but that's another great resource. So you've outlined several different things that people could think about. And folks, if you're listening and you're experiencing similar symptoms, or you're somebody who does experience seasonal affective disorder, and you have other ideas, and again, we're not doctors saying that people should go run right out and try these things. This is simply a forum or a platform where we can share some kind of just day-to-day types of things that we've used and that have had an impact on us, etc. And I think what's really important about all the different things you've described, Jen, is it shows an ongoing effort to mitigate the symptoms, right? You said early on, one of the realizations you've had to come to is that you can't fight it, that no matter what you're doing, it is going to happen because it is chemical. It's not that this is something that you look to from the perspective of a cure, but there are things you can do to help mitigate the symptoms. And I appreciate that you're showing that continuing to, in an ongoing way, kind of year after year, just do your research and give some reflection and try different things is probably one of the best recommendations you could give people.
Yeah. And I think I'm hopeful, that as I get farther into my faster way journey and really get, continue to get more healthy. I haven't reached my goals yet, but,
Sure.
but continue to be consistent with exercise. Like I noticed, even though I had been really consistent with my exercise, like around Thanksgiving and beginning of December, my exercise really fell off. And I do think that would have helped, but I think it fell off a little earlier than I had hoped. But I hope, going into this year or, next winter, having been on the program longer and maybe have some more consistency with that. And I just need to know too, like not to go into with such high expectations that
Yes.
it's going to not be existent, because I know that it's part of who I am. It's part of how my body reacts. I totally get why people are snowbirds.
Right.
For the winter. I just need to go in with realistic expectations.
Yeah.
And maybe really literally like write down a list of things for next year, like so that I can reference back to it, like know what happened this past year. And just, it's just about taking it one day at a time and doing the best I can and managing the symptoms of the sad, but also managing the emotional part of it, I think. I think I've definitely learned. I feel like every year I learn a little bit more, but I feel like I was much more aware this year because I was in a healthier place, and I have like done this journey a faster way and learned to change my mindset a little bit. And I think that it definitely helped, and it's helped me really get a better perspective, probably than I've ever had on this in years past.
Sure.
So that's been really kind of refreshing, even though I would not call seasonal affective refreshing.
Right.
But I think, doing this and really having to think about it has really made me really just reflect on it. And in the past, I'm just like, just get through it and be done with it. Like, I don't want to think about it. But I think it's been helpful for me.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I can tell, just like you said, just the epiphanies you've had about really kind of understanding time frames and realizing, gosh, maybe this actually was happening a lot longer than I thought. And I really just kind of misdiagnosed it myself, right, with the delayed postpartum depression.
Yeah.
But I'm
yeah.
not so sure. I think we should look that up. Maybe that is a thing. But so the last kind of reflection I want to share, and then I want you to have the last word, whatever, kind of last piece you'd like people to be thinking about as we close here is, in our, this was the first year that our friendship was rekindled, and I saw you, right? I literally watched you pull away, and felt a little bit of guilt on my end because, we were having at least weekly, if not more than weekly, interactions with each other, as we kind of supported each other in the faster weight coaching and just in general, etc. And I felt you pull away, and I didn't reach back out. And so that's my own experience. I'm going to wrap that with this kind of piece. But, and so it does make me wonder, it's kind of the whole chicken and egg conversation. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it because I don't necessarily think that you can, in the end, you can kind of solve it. But it makes me wonder, like now that I think back to November, right? Like you said, that's when you kind of started not being as consistent with the exercise, etc. And I do wonder, like, if you set a small goal for yourself for this coming, October, November, and said, no matter what, right, I am going to do this, because it's hard to know, like, did the symptoms of SAD start to creep in and that influenced your choices around exercise, or was the craziness of the holidays pulling you from exercise, and then that contributed to the exercise not helping with the SAD? And we can't figure that part out now, but I wonder about that, which leads me into the two last thoughts that I'll share and then turn it back over to you. One is, I hope that you and anybody else listening will consider small goals. And I know you've done that before, and I encourage you to continue to do it, because I wonder if you set those small goals, and you're so you just framed so well how this year had a big impact on you because you did have higher expectations because of the healthy lifestyle that you're living. But setting small goals then to navigate the months of November through February, or December through February, since you said the holidays kind of hold it off a little bit. And those small goals could be right this moment, like you're setting them right now with the learning fresh in your mind from this round, if you will, for next year, like going into your calendar and on November 1st, putting in a reminder to say, remember these small goals, right, based on this experience. And it's partly around exercise. It is partly around food too, because I do remember you saying in our pre-chat that, the bear analogy extended to the cravings of food. Like you were kind of, all of a sudden you were craving not whole food carbs, if you will, that you had given up for a long time and had been happy about. So setting those small goals. And then the second thing I'm going to encourage you to put in that calendar reminder is that's the time to reach out to the people around you and ask for support, right? Like you talked about how, you feel guilt and shame about, the stuff falls off, right? You get behind on the housework, you get behind on the laundry, you get behind on, meeting the typical obligations that you have with your family and friends. And yet your boys especially are old enough, right, to see it, to know it, to get it. And I wonder if instead of just kind of letting it come and then letting, the hubby pick up the slack or whatever, if maybe you all just establish that there will be a different routine November through February, right? And we will all be engaged in things that outside of that time frame you guys don't usually have to think about or worry about or what have you, because this is going to come and it's going to happen, and here's how I need you to support. And from a friend perspective, I already know I'm going to go into my own calendar and I'm going to give myself a reminder in November that I need to be more diligent about how I engage with you from November to February. And the people who love you are going to want to do that for you. For the most part, we're going to step back when you pull back. And this, folks, I'm talking to Jen, but of course this is a general for all of you, right? We're going to step back when you pull back, because our natural inclination is not to want to upset you, not to want to hurt your feelings, not to want to step on your toes. And so I'm gonna make a note for myself in November to lean in. No matter what you're doing, I'm gonna lean in, right? And kind of push it to say, because I do believe that if you could, in general, if we can maintain those connections, maybe that's helpful, right? Maybe in the end, it helps kind of lessen the effect because you have people in your world going, nope, not going to let you disappear, right? Like, not happening. So sorry, I'm going to be obnoxious. So anyway, that's again for the folks listening, kind of the way I'm thinking about it, because whether you're dealing with it, seasonal affective or sad yourself, or like you're sitting here thinking to yourself, holy crap, I think my husband has that, or holy crap, my best friend has. Like, if you're thinking about that, we can't be the people who diagnose them and solve it for them, but we can be the people who control how we engage with them and how we support them, so that they're not alone in it, I guess. So anyway, Jen, so those are some thoughts that I have, and certainly any reflections you have on that, and then final word for the folks listening.
Yeah, I actually really love that idea because that would not be my normal inclination to, here I am, I'm thinking about it, it's fresh in my mind, like this is what I want to do next year. But if I don't document that and make some notes for myself, and I love the idea of putting on a calendar and, actually like, making a document that says, this is what I learned this year, this is what I want to try next year, because by the time November gets here, I'm not going to remember any of that stuff. So I think that's super, super important, and it's a fantastic idea. I'm totally going to do it.
Good.
And you talk about the reaching out, which is really funny. It's not funny, it's I'm just going to give you another reflection. I feel like I am that person. Like, I love reaching out to my friends. I love
You are.
them and being there for them, and it's so hard for me in the winter because I feel like I sometimes just don't have that energy in me. It's like and it's not that I don't care. It's not that I don't want to reach out to them. It's just that I swear to you, sleep just takes over everything. That tiredness is so hard to overcome. So that's another thing that I often feel guilty about, because I am very, like, if you saw me in the winter, you would not know I had this. If I'm out at a swim meet and I am near people, I am talking to them. I am being social, but it takes a lot for me to put myself in that place. I mean, that is one thing about, my son being involved in swimming. It does force me
Absolutely.
to go out and do that. But, if you've ever suffered from depression, or you've ever had any type of depression, you know that it's easy to put that face on. And I'm not putting a face on. I'm being very genuine.
No, of course.
And being very much myself. But I don't know how to say this. Like, when I'm out and I'm in a social situation, I'm going to be fine. You would not know that about me. It's the every other parts of the day that are hard. I'm not going to be in a social situation and not talk to anybody. That's not who I am. And I'm not going to be in a social situation where someone might need help and I'm not going to reach out. It's the every other part of the day, like when I normally might reach out to a friend or call them and say, hey, how are you doing? What can I do to help? What are you going through? That part falls off for me. And I feel guilty about that too, because I do feel like I'm that person that really stays connected with my friends and the people that I'm close to, and that does fall off. So, I think what you're saying is super, I smiled when you said, oh, I'm going to put my calendar for November 1st. I'm going to, lean in a little bit more. And it just made me smile. Made me feel a little uncomfortable because I know that's hard for me during that time. I kind of smile, like, oh, look at her. She's already on me for next year. But, I think kind of what I want to leave people with is, you have to give yourself some grace. Like, I know I have this. I don't think I was very good about doing that this year. And you have to remember that there is a chemical or biological component of this. And you can't be so hard on yourself because you're experiencing this, because you don't have a lot of you don't have a lot of control over it coming.
Yep.
What you can control, is your mindset around it.
Sure.
Your schedule. I think that's one thing that I didn't talk about, but like trying to have a schedule is super important. And I was not good about that this year. I was kind of willy-nilly all over the place. And I think if you can have a consistent schedule, that's very helpful with it as well. But I think just giving ourselves some grace to go through it with a mindset that is like, I know this is what it is,
Right.
what I'm going to do to try and mitigate all the symptoms of it, if possible. And when I can't, I'm just going to say, okay, that was today, tomorrow's a new day, and just do the best we can.
That's it.
And you know, it's hard, but I think mindset is huge, and setting your expectations realistically is a big part of that as well. And yeah, reaching out when you need help or you need support is going to be super important. And you know, I think having spent quite a bit of time sort of really reflecting on this year, I'm hopeful that you know, I will have you know, a plan in place, and maybe some resources that I didn't have this year, and be able to go in and maybe have, you know, a different experience. And aside from that too, I do want to say that every year the experience is not exactly the same, even for myself.
Sure.
Some are better than others, and I don't know what makes that happen. I don't know if it's where I am in my, I'm sure part of it is where I am in my own personal life.
Sure.
Maybe it's whether the season is milder. Like even this year was pretty mild. We didn't get a lot of snow here, and yet I still experienced, you know, fairly, you know, consistent symptoms. So
Sure.
I think just going in realistically, having, you know, some realistic goals, having, you know, being not easy on yourself, being realistic with yourself about what to expect is huge.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. And like you said, giving yourself some grace.
Right. And if you feel like you need more support than that, then reaching out to a health, you know, a you know, a health person.
Yeah.
What am I trying a medical, you know, a therapist, whatever.
course.
If you need, you know, if you feel yourself going way down the rabbit hole, you know, that's the hardest part sometimes, is asking for help. But
Yep.
yeah, I think being aware is like such a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Being aware and going in aware is a huge piece of it.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Thank you for that, Jen. And you know what? I just can't thank you enough for being willing to come on and talk about this and to be so vulnerable, because that's hard for us to do. And yet there's no question in my mind that there are going to be people listening who now might be able to be more vulnerable themselves with the people around them, especially if they've been kind of suffering from this or navigating this without even realizing what it was, or without asking anybody for support or what have you. So thank you so much, my friend, for being a part of our conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
I love what you're doing with your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it's because of folks like you. All right, my dear, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.
All right. Okay, I don't know about you folks, but for me, that was a really powerful conversation. Very quickly, I do want to summarize the symptoms of SAD, because I think that's so important for all of us, and I really want everybody to pay close attention, because they were embedded in my conversation with Jen, but calling them out, I think, is really important. And this is a really critical opportunity for each of us to check ourselves and to consider our loved ones, to see, okay, is there somebody out there, right, that we could share this podcast with, for example, because we see this in them, and it might be an opening for them to start to kind of think about how to help themselves. So here are the symptoms. I'm just going to run through them really quick, and they'll be in the podcast notes, folks. Feeling depressed most of the day, nearly every day. Losing interest in activities you once enjoyed, having low energy, having problems with sleeping, experiencing changes in your appetite or weight, feeling sluggish or agitated, having difficulty concentrating, feeling hopeless, worthless, or guilty, and even as extreme as having frequent thoughts of death or suicide. It's scary when you think about the progression and spectrum of those symptoms, and what makes it unique, because any of you who've struggled with depression yourselves or know people who have, those sound very kind of generic, if you will, but what's unique about it is a time frame that you can really kind of map back and go, gosh, it really sets in the fall, and then it kicks through winter, and then I kind of come out of it, right? Which is different than someone who suffers from depression that's all year, right? So that kind of is what distinguishes it. So Melissa, talk to me. I know you've had a chance, you've listened to the conversation with Jen. What struck you as most important? What do you want to make sure we call out for folks?
Oh my goodness, Janice, I took so much from this interview. Look, it's amazing. I want to first say thank you to Jen.
Yeah.
She reminds me, and hopefully everybody listening, that everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And you may not know that story just by watching them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times we get so wrapped up in our own lives that we don't pay attention to the fact that somebody has fallen back or isn't as connected as they used to be. And by just looking at her, you may not, she even said in the interview herself that, you know, when you see her at activities and her son's swim meets and things like that, you wouldn't know.
Yep.
That she's dealing with what she's dealing with. So I really, really thank her for taking the time out to share her story, and to just educate people on what's happening in her life and probably the lives of people we know and love and don't even realize.
Absolutely.
So that was my first big thing. My second one is another love fest for you. It's the fact that this podcast, what I realize every time we do one, is that it really helps to hear from regular everyday people about their experiences and their stories. Sure, we have medical professionals who can tell us all about SAD.
Right.
Sure, we can Google and find out some information. But what neither of those things does is give us a specific idea of how it affects someone.
Right.
A lot of times those things are broad or they're general. But hearing someone who's actually going through it talk about it is a different perspective, and it gives you a lot more. I guess it hits home a bit more when you can hear it from that person in their words and their own perspective. So those were two things I wanted to start off with. I think the thing I took away from this the most is there was so much.
I know.
I don't want to make this wrap up a whole nother show, but I guess the big thing I would take away from what Jen had to say, and this is probably something most people didn't even pick up on, is that she knows herself.
Yeah. She
She has paid attention to her body and her patterns, and she knows herself. And that's not something a lot of us can say.
Yeah.
A lot of people who probably suffer with this aren't even aware still that this is something that they're dealing with. They just feel like, I'm sad again.
Yeah.
And don't really pay attention to the fact that it starts at this time of the year, every year, and it's a seasonal thing. So I absolutely love that she pays attention to herself. She stated that she's not been diagnosed, yet she is confident and secure in what is going on with her.
Right. I love that.
Me too. And getting diagnosed isn't easy in this country.
Yeah.
It's not easy to see a therapist. It's not easy to see a doctor, especially if you don't have great insurance or, wealth. So
Oh my gosh, that's so true.
To have someone who just pays attention to themselves, does research, which it's very obvious she has done. I just think that's a wonderful thing. And I hope people pay attention to that and learn from that, especially if they think this is something that they might be experiencing or someone they love might be experiencing.
See, this is why you're here, Melissa, because I love that you called that part out, right? That you can listen to the whole conversation and say, okay, this was not something we said directly. It's something that we take away from it. So let me kind of capture it for you. So thank you for that, because that is huge. And the point you made about, like, not everybody can just go to the doctor and say, hey, I feel this, and can you diagnose me, right? So that is exactly what I aspire to accomplish with this, right? That anybody can access this podcast, right? So with that, and again, we're always clear, we're not medical professionals, we're not doctors, but we are real people who can talk about our real experience.
Experiences. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and if it resonates with you, grab a hold of it.
Grab a hold of it and use it. But as my grandmother used to say, eat the meat and toss the bones. Absolutely. You take what you need and not the rest. I guess the other big point I wanted to touch on, Janice, was your ideas. I thought your ideas were absolutely fantastic for both the person that may be suffering from this disorder and those around them. Your advice to that person to be proactive.
Right.
And to maybe set reminders for themselves or something that they can go back to and say, okay, it's that time of year. These are the goals I have.
Sure.
These are the things I need to do to battle this thing. In the world we're in today with the internet and all of this easy access stuff like calendar reminders and cell phone reminders and journals and all of that, that's a really big thing that they can do to help themselves.
Right.
to be prepared. I think, like we stated earlier, sometimes we just kind of let this stuff happen to us.
Sure.
And if we're more proactive, for Jen even, there's this podcast that she can go back to and listen to and remind herself that, okay, it's coming. Here's what I need to do to be prepared. And then the other part was for the people around. I love the idea you had of leaning in.
Yeah.
Putting a reminder on your calendar.
That's it.
Not leaving it up to just the person dealing with the disorder to make it better.
Yeah.
If you love someone, if you care for someone. I guess the only thing I would say is when a person is not in the midst of sad, or any disorder for that matter, that might have that might be episodic,
right?
To talk to them when they're not in the midst of it and find out what they need. Because I think for some people, and probably for most of us, leaning in is great. But I do think that there might be the rare few who don't want that, who actually want you to fall back, but want the comfort of knowing that when they come out of fog or out of the haze, that you'll still be there and you won't hold it against them or fault them or treat them differently. Giving them the safe space, letting them know that you will hold space for them.
Yeah.
So that when they're ready, they can step right back into that space and life will continue with you. So I think speaking to the people you love and asking them, what do you need from me? And then not just asking it, but providing it when the time is right. So those things were great takeaways for me and hopefully for everybody else.
And we're going to wrap that part up with that because Melissa, that part you fleshed out and it was an afterthought for after the interview for me was, okay, lean in, great, but what if they don't want it right then? And so I love that you kind of wrap that whole piece up by filling in that blank, which is, say it out loud because we got to have the guts to say it out loud, but say it out loud with the final message being, and look, I'm going to be here when you get back. Right. Yeah. I'm going to hold the space for you. And those are the words you use. I'm going to hold the space for you. So, and folks, I know that hopefully for you, a conversation like this elicits a whole lot of thinking around, well, gosh, I suffer from this thing, or I have a friend who suffers from this thing, and what can I take away? And hopefully you're making some connections, but know too that we are looking for you to drive the conversation in this podcast. So yeah, as I said early on, I have a whole host of topics I am, working my way through and loving talking about, but it's a platform for real people and the people listening are real people, right? So if you have something, right, respond to the post that you saw with this podcast. Share your comments, share your ideas, and if you're a real person and or know a real person who you feel like has a story that it's important for other people to hear, reach out to us, right? And you can do that, right? So you can do that by going to our Facebook page and making sure you like the Facebook page and leave a comment there or feedback there. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case. And certainly, last but not least, feel free to either send me a private message in that forum, but also send us an email, right? Somebody Asked Me podcast@gmail.com. Somebody Asked Me podcast@gmail.com. And those are always in the episode notes. Yeah, go ahead.
And I want to add, share this podcast with the people you love. Yes. That's the reason we do this, is to reach people and help people. And we can't do that without you guys who find it helpful and who think it's important and who learn from it, to share it with the people that you care about. So whether it's on your social media, whether you're using word of mouth, whether you're emailing it, whatever, just make sure that you're sharing it with the people you think you could help, because that's the goal in the end.
That's it. And thank you for reminding us about that, Melissa. And I'll just add to that, if there's somebody in your mind you're thinking this sad thing really connects with, and maybe you're not ready to just ask them or bring it up with them, sharing this podcast on your social media and it just generally speaking, you found it beneficial, could be a way to open the conversation.
That's exactly right.
All right, folks. So let's talk next week, and really let's talk all of April, because for the month of April, we're going to focus on multiple realms of the realms that we cover as we dig into the broader topic of trauma. So to start us off, we'll spend episode 9 with Michelle Swisher. and one of her colleagues. Both are licensed social workers, and Michelle works specifically with a school district in Virginia, which happens to be the very school district that Melissa and I graduated high school from. So in episode 9, we're going to dig into the realm of children and parenting as we share critical learning on how to support your child when they experience some sort of trauma in their lives. And Michelle actually conducts classes for parents for this very purpose. So we're going to dig into that. And then we're going to follow that the following week with a discussion designed to support educators as they support kids in school who've experienced trauma. So we'll talk about that. It's going to be a tough month as we dig into this learning. It's 4 episodes that every single one of you will want to hear. So tune in next week as we start our 4-part series on trauma, and we'll get to it.